What's up, everybody? This is Alex with WMD back at you again. This time we're going to be talking about the Arpitecht, going a little bit deeper. So last week we did some basics, how to use it with the Metron, and people seemed to dig it. And then I got a couple comments about let's go take it further. What are some more advanced techniques? So while just kind of refreshing my memory and hanging out, I made this little patch, and I was pretty excited about it, so I'm just going to bring it up. Alright, so right now what the Arpitecht is controlling is this simple little spectrum through the pole zero voice. And what we've got going on is we've got the Metron clocking the step input, and then we've also got some other things going on. So the Metron's controlling the voltage block, which you can see it's running really fast here. That's for the bassline. So the bassline's being changed here. But then on channel 2, I've got the clock divider up, so I'm changing every bar on the voltage block. And so that's changing my note mask here on Arpitecht. So it's a relatively subtle change, but it's adding a ton of movement. It's sounding really nice. And then I've also got some gates that are controlling the direction of the arpeggio, and then I'm using the slide input from Metron. I'm putting some gates from Metron into the slide input, and then taking the slide out and plugging that into a secondary envelope, which is going into the pole zero's volt per octave input, and that's how I'm getting that kind of accent thing. So if I bring that back up, and then I'm also attenuating that secondary envelope with axis here. So you can hear. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're just going to pull this patch completely apart, and then we're going to just kind of explore messing around with making Arpitecht sounds and stuff like that. So I'm going to pull these cables real quick. So we're done. Shout out to Luigi's Modular with Luigi's Modular Supply with these sweet cables. I really dig them, and we just got a ton of them. So as you can tell, we're now using a bunch of new cables. So I'm just going to clear out everything on my Metron, and we're just going to start completely over. And we're going to see how it goes. So first things first, I'm just going to throw together a quick little drum patch. So I've said this a bunch in my videos, and I'm going to kind of clarify a little bit. I like to think of Metron in groups of 4. So right now I'm just using one trigger input for each of my drums just to keep things extremely simple. So I've got a kick drum, a fracture, a chimera, and a crucible. So I've got 4 drums there. That's my first 4 Metron tracks. So I'm going to leave the next 4 blank just so I totally can space everything out in my mind. And now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use number 9, and we're going to use that for our step and reset info in Arpitecht. So just as we did in the last video, we're going to create a little voice here. Alright, so what I just plugged in there was I plugged the saw wave output from the Spectrum through the pole zero straight into the ADSR VCA, which I have not done yet, out of the ADSR VCA straight into the mixer. I've got a gate output from Metron going into ADSR VCA and the envelope going into my pole zero. So just as our last video, I can go through here and do some step information. Turn up that channel, and then we can set it to some resets. Transpose down to the bass octave here. Alright, So that's pretty much as far as we've gotten so far, right? So let's take this a little bit further. What else can we do to make these things a little bit cooler? Well, we didn't use slide rhythm in the last video, so let's check that out and just kind of see what it sounds like. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to find a little note mask that we like, and I think that should be fine. Let's listen to it. Cool. Turn the reset up right in the beginning here, and now let's turn up the slide rhythm. All right, so that's one thing we can do, right? It's we're resetting on the 1, so every time it wraps around, it's going to have the slide rhythm is going to be the same. So now we can change that up a little bit. We can get some different sounds. So one thing we can do is change up the slide rhythm with CV. So we can go over here, turn this all the way up, or turn this all the way down, I mean, and now we can change our slide rhythm with different steps here. So now we're getting different slide times, different slide rhythms on different sections. We could also do that with the regular rhythm, input. So turn that again. We'll just get different rhythms each time we recall a different step on voltage block. So this is a cool way just to kind of play around with different rhythms. Now we do what we did in the last video and add notes mask to that, and so now every different rhythm will get a different notes mask. So let's try this guy. That sounds pretty good. We'll do the next one. And we'll do the next one. Oh, I like that one too. Now we got. So right now I've got no resets going into Arpitecht. I've literally just got 16th notes across, so we're just clocking it straight to 16th notes. And then we're changing up the slide time, or sorry, the slide rhythm and the actual rhythm knobs with CV. Alright, so one other thing we can do is we can use the slide output. So the slide output sends a gate every time that the module slides. So what can this be good for? One thing is we can throw it into the random input, and now every time we slide, it's going to hit a random note inside of the note mask. So since we're over here, let's turn the note mask all the way up here, and you can hear it a little bit more. And every time it slides, it's going to get a different rhythm. So let's turn down the rhythms here and just make it get a little bit more. So now we're kind of bouncing around a little bit more. Every time we get a rhythm, or every time the slide rhythm hits, and every time it slides, we're going to get a random note. Put that reset in the beginning, and we're going to get pretty much the same thing almost every time. The thing about random is it jumps to a random step in the arpeggio, not just a random note. So if it jumps to the one that happens to have slide on it, you're going to slide again. So this is kind of a cool way to get more of like a generative thing and just kind of let the sequencer do the work for you. And then again, we can just move around here. Alright, so another thing we can do with this slide output, something I really like to do, and I was doing in the example in the very beginning, is we can take that slide output and we'll run it into a secondary envelope. So I'm going to run it into the multi-mode envelope here. Now you can see that every time this slide LED opens up or turns on, we're getting an envelope coming out of the multi-mode envelope. So So now let's just take that out. We'll take the envelope out of here, and we'll just run into the secondary input on pole 0, which is the 1 volt per octave input. So now every time we slide, we're getting it to open, the filter's opening all the way. So now we're kind of getting this more like accent kind of feel, right? But it's opening it all the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attenuate that. And how I'm going to do that is I'm just going to use Axis, which is our new mixer. I'm only going to run through one side of it. And so now the further I fade away from that side, the less accents we're going to get. So I got none right now, and I can turn the accents up. You can do this with the blender, you can do this with any sort of crossfading mixer or any sort of attenuator. This is just what I got in the case right now. So now I'm just going to take the mod box and I'm going to run that into the CV of Axis. And so that way we'll just get those accents to happen. Will happen more on like a LFO kind of scale. So they'll happen every once in a while, but not every single time. Right? Alright, so again, we're using the rhythm and slide functions with CV in order to generate our rhythmic patterns here. So now let's take out those inputs. So we're gonna leave the notes input in here. We're gonna take the rhythm ones out. So the slide input and the regular rhythm are all the way out. And so now we gotta take the slide rhythm down, and we've just got normal arpeggio again. So I'm gonna take some of these gates out, and I'm gonna add a couple more resets. And now I'm gonna add my own slides. So I'm gonna take another cable from channel 11, and I'm gonna run into the slide input, which is down here on the bottom right. And now I just take some 100% gates. So now we're getting those slides to happen when we want them to happen. So now we're in full control of the rhythm again. And again, I've still got this slide output patch, so that's basically just a mult of what I'm doing here. So every time I give this pattern here, every time I give a gate out of channel 11, we're also triggering this envelope. Alright, so now I'm going to take channel 12 and I'm going to run this into the up and down. So we're going to take that into the direction, right? So what it did right there is it turned my direction to down because we've got no voltage present. So again, with my 100% gates, I can change up the direction. I love that. That's pretty dope. Let's add in this symbol here, just jam a minute. And again, I've just been using triggers with the Arpitecht step input, so let's add some gates in here. And again with Metron, I can duplicate this variation and then I can make a whole new variation. So I'm just going to go through here, clear my channel 9, put in a new gate pattern. I don't know what it is. I'm going to add some gate lengths here. And then we'll just go to it and see what it sounds like. Let's make it go down at the beginning here. So we'll turn this guy off. then we'll go up at the end. Or maybe we'll only go up for a certain section. So now let's take that, let's make it a 4-bar pattern. And then let's make that trill only happen at the end. So we're gonna add some ups. And we'll add some resets too. So now we've got a pretty cool pattern with lots of variation. So again, you can use that slide output to kind of go to anything. It sounds really nice using it as this accent output. All right, so in the last video and in this video, I kind of stuck to like a bassline kind of thing, doing more of like an acid bassline. But what about doing more of a lead melody? Well, one of the things I love about Arpitecht is that it has this transpose knob, so it's pretty easy just to transpose up an octave. Also, WMD makes a module called the Volt, which adds octave switches to any oscillator you want. We could do that, you know, obviously here with the Spectrum because it has that as well. But with Arpitecht, we can just bring it up there. Alright, and so for the melody, I want this to sound a little bit more like an arpeggiator, right? So let's go back to a 1-bar pattern. Alright, and then we'll just clear all this stuff out. And then we'll do a... So now all I'm doing is changing up the direction every once in a while, and I've got this cool little lead line going on, right? I'm going to filter it out just a little bit. Now let's run it through a little bit of delay. Grab some cables here. Love that one. Alright, so now we need some bass, and I don't have any bass. I don't have another voice in this system, except for I do. I've got another Spectrum. I've got an overseer that we usually use for the master bus, but here I'm just going to use it as another voice. I don't have another envelope. I've used both of my envelopes, but I do have a mod box which can be synced. So I'm just going to create a cool little 16th note bass line here by running my saw wave through the overseer. And we're just going to run that into channel 6 here and just listen real quick and just make sure it sounds how we think it should. There we go. And now we're going to take the clock out of Metron. We're going to run that into the sync input on Modbox here. So let me find that. And then we're just going to sync both of our inputs here. And we're going to take this guy. I'm just going to take the output of the skew now. So the second envelope, we're just going to run that into only the low pass side. And we're going to use the sawtooth wave here, which we're doing. There we go, and I'm going to turn this up 1 octave and hear where we kind of sound like with the beat real quick. Probably turn it down the mixer a little bit. Alright, so now we can so yeah, this is pretty sweet. Let's change up the rhythm. Ooh, so yeah, again, I want to make this a 4-bar pattern. And we're going to just change this up a little bit. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use voltage block to control our baseline note as well as the Arpitect notes mask. So let's bring up the Arpitect real quick and let's just choose our notes mask for a couple of steps. Change the scale here. Alright, so now instead of the clock out running my voltage block, I'm just going to run the voltage block with some outputs here. So I'm going to use 13 and 14 now. Let's go up to 13. We say we reset on 1 every time, and then we'll just do every bar here. And then I had from earlier, my clock division was set up on channel 2, so we'll just change that. There we go. Alright, so now I'm going to run these. Instead of running at just every bar, I'm going to run at 16th notes. So we'll just, so we've got our baseline, and we'll say every bar we should reset to the beginning. And as you can see, my Arpitect channel is just cruising. And so this is something I talked about in the last video. This is something you can use to your advantage, but it's not going to be exactly what you want every single time, right? But this does sound pretty cool right now. I'm pretty into it. But so let's slow down the Arpitect channel just by using the clock divisions in the voltage block here. So that is channel number 1. So I'm just going to shift channel 1, and then we'll go into divisions. And then we'll say this guy should only be 4 steps long. So now my Arpitect's changing every bar still. But then my my baseline still got that cool little 6-step sequence going. So again, I'm just going to copy this into C, and now let's just change up. We're going to go up to 1 pattern on here, and we'll just change up the direction again. And so now let's listen to it. Whoops, wrong channel. Here we go. We'll make this 1 pattern. So we just created a completely different thing just by changing up when we're changing the directions. Go back to B. Now Now I'm going to go to C, but I'm going to change the kick drum to 4 on the floor. And why don't I just do a cool little loop? I'm going to change up that bass line real quick. So go to channel 2 here. It's these two. Why don't make this one just 4? Kind of like that 6-step length. Then we go back to B. Do I got slides going on this guy? Let's find out. Slide was channel number 11. So yeah, I'm going to add some slides here. Alright, so that's it. I mean, that's more advanced ways of using the Arpitecht to create some cool bass lines and to create leads. One thing to not forget about is, just like I said with those transpose, like check this out. We're going to keep our beat in here, take out that bass line, just bring it down into bass line territory. Why don't we take the range down a bit? Turn this other spectrum up a couple bits and listen to it now, because I turned it up some octaves. So now these two just switched roles. So one thing to never forget about is that you can take two voices and just completely switch their roles by way of transposition. You can use the Arpitecht's transpose knob, which is an easy way to go. You can use a octave switch on your favorite oscillator that has an octave switch, or you can use the WMD Volt, which I don't have in this case, but it's a really great way just to add octave switching to any sort of patch that needs it. So yeah, that's it. I think that that's a pretty good place to stop. Really just experiment with the different things you can do with this thing. And remember that with Metron, with all the gates, you have so much power just to send into here and just see what goes on. One other thing you can do that I didn't do is run gates into random, right? So you can run gates into random and just say randomly pick a note. We use the slide output for that, but we didn't use just a random thing from Metron. Some other cool ideas you can use is just running a sequence and using the Arpitecht as your quantizer, and then hit it with a super fast gate and see what happens. Inside of that mask, you're going to get some pretty cool runs around there. So that's what I got, and I hope you guys dug it. And if you guys have any suggestions on what you want to see, techniques, modules, anything like that, hit us up in the comments, or you know, send me a DM or an email or whatever. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.